You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of Dodge Movie Podcast. This week, in our second week of talking about Kevin Smith films, we are talking about Chasing Amy, his follow-up from Mallrats. He wrote and directed it. It stars Ben Affleck, Joey Lauren Adams, Jason Lee, Ethan Suplee. You'll recognize a lot of these names from the last film. Brian O'Halloran, Walter Flanagan, Matt Damon, Jason Mewes, and Kevin Smith as Jay and Silent Bob. I wanted to make a note that his executive producer, Scott Mosier, worked with him on a number of his films, and David Klein is a cinematographer who also did Clerks, Red State, Cop Out, Zack and Mary Make a Porno. He did the Reaper pilot that Kevin directed, and he did Clerks 2. So much like his cast that comes back, I think that Kevin probably has, you naturally kind of have crew that you vibe with, and so David Klein is obviously one of those. The filming locations were mostly around New Jersey, Leonardo, Ashbury Park, Middletown, Red Bank, Rumson, where Kevin grew up, so he's familiar with all those locations, and also New York. And this film came out in 1997. The synopsis for this film is Holden and Banky are comic book artists. Everything's going good for them until they meet Alyssa, who is also a comic book artist. Holden falls for her, but his hopes are crushed when he finds out that she's a lesbian. Production note, or I guess a writing note. Right. Kevin wrote this film because he struggled with a girlfriend, and so he is basically Holden in this film. And he was struggling with kind of what does it mean when somebody you care for doesn't even care for your own gender, in his kind of sophomoric run is still struggling with kind of things that I guess 20-year-old men are kind of, or people, I guess, could be dealing with. So
yeah, I would say people, because I think if a gent had previously dated other gents, I think a lot of ladies would have a problem with that. So I think they tend to think in that very binary thinking.
Right, when you're young. Although, I don't know, the kids these days, they're very open-minded. So, but let's not get into that. Mike, how about if you tee us off with what is the pickup line of this film?
I don't know, which is good. But it comes as part of a line of dialogue, which is kind of humorous. I don't know. I love Chow Yun-Fat. I just don't see him playing Batman. So again, Batman comes back in a Kevin Smith film with Ben Affleck in it.
Yes. Yes. I'm telling you, he willed it to be.
I think he did.
Yeah. So the tone in this film, as I was watching this, I was wildly uncomfortable by this film. And I think it wasn't until I really started talking and thinking about all of Kevin's films and how at the time he wrote this, he was wrestling with some of these issues. And so there is an immaturity to his thinking that he couldn't have at 20 that maybe he did have at like 40 and 50.
I think you see both Holden and Banky are pretty immature. I think it's a funny sight gag, but where the character of Alyssa kisses another woman after performing at the club, and Banky claps with a kind of smile on his face. And I think a lot of early 20s heterosexual males would probably have a similar reaction, right? They kind of love lesbians in maybe not the best way.
Right.
So I thought that was very apropos of what I think that character would react. And then Holden's whole struggle, how he goes through this, I didn't quite respond to it because I felt like it was so shallow and kind of short-sighted, but I think perhaps there maybe are many, but there could be a 23-year-old comic book artist guy that would have a similar problem with it. I will say, you mentioned you're a little uncomfortable. I forgot how slow this film is. Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of monologues, very long blocks of dialogue. And I say this as a person whose movies tend to be about people standing around talking. I totally get that. But it just felt to me like it was noticeably monologue-y.
Yeah, yeah. But that makes sense too, because of where Kevin would have been in his life, and we know he's a contemplative, kind of introspective. I mean, that's kind of his whole oeuvre, right? Is just all these monologues. So it does make sense, but yeah, there are comic moments, but this one isn't as strong in the comedy, I guess. I mean, this is the one that's labeled comedy, romance, drama, and that makes more sense. I think it's like a romantic drama and with some comedy in there.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not sure where the comedy comes in.
Right.
It feels
well,
very
there's little
dramatic
gags
to me.
here and there.
Yeah.
So, well, let's move on to one cinematographic, if I say it fast, so you won't notice that I didn't say it right, is when they were playing darts at the beginning. And I liked how basically the camera was either right under or right over the dartboard. So it was really kind of, I thought, a cool effect.
That's a very cool effect. I also made a note of that. It's not only is it interesting to have the viewer kind of be downrange of the dart, so there's a certain amount of natural tendency to want to duck, but it's also a clever twist because normally you want to avoid your actors looking into the lens.
Right.
And this is a case where they're staring right at the audience, and it makes sense. And it's an innovative two-shot to have these two characters having a conversation, but still looking at the audience instead of at each other.
Yep. And then there's the spending time together montage to show that even though it's kind of under the guise of being friends, and at this point Holden knows that she's a lesbian, but he just wants to spend time with her, so he's willing to kind of overlook it so that they get to spend time together.
I think at this point I'm going to ask, when do we review When Harry Met Sally?
I feel like somebody else has suggested that. Maybe it was you. So it definitely needs to go on the list, and we do have to figure out whether it's a Nora Ephron month or maybe just romantic comedies like next February or something.
But I was thinking of Harry. Men and women can never be friends.
Right.
And I think that montage is really in that vein.
Yeah.
Right? The viewer can see that they're not friends.
And there is, I mean, that's throughout the whole movie of When Harry Met Sally is, kind of them walking through the park and ordering food and different things of showing that. Yeah, definitely that one needs to go on the list.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed the blue moonlight that shone down on them as they lay on the couch.
Right. So I looked that up.
Yeah.
Because I thought, why is it always blue? Right.
Oh,
why is moonlight always blue? Doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason is because it's the way our eyes work. Is in low light situations, they pick up more blue than other colors. So it looks more blue to the human eye. Even though the light hasn't changed, the moonlight is just reflected sunlight.
So that's a little look into the world of Michael Dodge. Is I saw it and I was like, oh yeah, they always do moonlight blue, huh? And I move on with life. And he has to look it up. But I love it because I benefit. Because he goes, hey, guess what? Did you know why they use blue for moonlight?
Yeah.
And then I get to know. It's like you're my Wikipedia.
And another fun movie fact. I don't know if we'll ever review a movie that does this, so I'm just going to give it to you. There's something that's called Day for Night. Right. Where you wanted to shoot at night, but it was difficult. So you would shoot on film during daylight, and then you would process it to be a little bit more blue. The problem is everybody knew what you were doing because the shadows were way too sharp. It just didn't look right. But from a production standpoint, sometimes that was your only choice.
Yep. Lots of handheld in this movie, so this is not a Dustin Morrow movie.
That's interesting because I generally don't like handheld either, but I didn't notice that. I didn't make a note of that.
Oh. Very interesting.
So tip of the cap to the camera department.
What other things about the cinematography did you like?
They did nice framing. So there's a scene early on where they're in the loft where they make the comic. And Jason Lee as Banky is seated at the drawing desk and Ben Affleck as Holden is standing. And there's this, all I can call it is Luxor lamp, right? The overhead lamp that's got like the two arms and the hinge. And it was positioned such that it made this very nice angle between the two of them. I thought that was pretty nice.
Was it even kind of like a leading line as to Holden's kind of, I guess, like eye line or?
Right.
Yeah.
Also, when Holden and Alyssa are talking in the park, they're sitting in the swings, and so the chains of the swings make a nice frame for each one of them.
Right.
You already mentioned the hanging out music montage. I thought it was interesting that when Holden and Alyssa are in the Ford Explorer having a conversation, and he's really telling her for the first time that he cares about her. It's one continuous take filmed from the back seat of the SUV.
Wow.
And so what the camera person did, and maybe this is handheld there, is they don't cut. The camera just pans back and forth between the two characters as they give their dialogue. And I thought that was an interesting production choice, but also from the standpoint of the viewer, it's like you're right in the middle of that tennis match of going back and forth between the two characters. And then a nice little shot that I really liked was Holden and Banky sitting on the stoop outside their apartment late in the film when they're talking. And I just thought it was a real nice 2-shot of the two of them sitting on the stairs talking.
Yeah, you could tell that these two, almost Jay always calls Bob his hetero life mate. And very much so, that's the relationship that these two had. I don't think that there were intimate romantic feelings towards them, but these two men were bros. I mean, they were maybe our first bromance or something. I mean, they cared for one another, and that's why Banky's having so much trouble with this interloper called Alyssa.
I think that actually, maybe realistically, but it brings up something that happens a lot. You'll notice that it was a female character who says that maybe Banky has romantic feelings for Holden. And I think when men have intimate friendships, it's hard for them because both men and women see that as a romantic thing.
Right.
And it's difficult, whereas I think if women have a very intimate, close best friend, it's only weirdos like Banky that say, oh, you're going to kiss.
Right.
Whereas I think in this case, that was part of the struggle that Holden and Banky went through, is trying to come to grips with what their relationship really was. Right.
Mm. I made a note that in the ViewAskewiverse, Matt Damon is in this one again, and so is one of the guys from Clerks. So Kevin, once again, kind of brings everybody into it. And this is a very much a Kevin Smith film. I know from I guess I'm fangirling, but I know he loves the show Degrassi, and there's a line, let's get a pizza and just watch Degrassi. Mike noticed the timely reference when somebody was dancing, you are no Danny Terrio, which for those of us in the fifth generation of our lives, or in the fifth, what would you call it, the fifth decade of our lives, that's a callback to a dance show.
Dance Fever?
Dance Fever, yeah.
Right, yeah.
I did have trouble in this film. Once again, this is, the late 90s, and so this was more of a thing, and now I'm more sensitive to it. But Jason uses the F word when referencing homosexuals a lot, and it bothered me a lot.
Oh, from the Department of Can't Be Made Today, they also use the queer word.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And not in a positive sense.
Right.
And the N-word for people of color.
Right.
So while that may have been, I think, era appropriate.
And not only era appropriate, sorry to interrupt you, but not only era appropriate, I'm sure Kevin knew people that talk like this. I get that, but it was not enjoyable to sit through. I was happy when this movie was over, kind of.
And that's interesting because I'm one of these people that believe that words have no inherent good or bad. It's what we ascribe to them, right? So in the era when something is made, right, we have to consider it in that context of that, not 100 years later when we have chosen to have a different opinion of that word, but we are watching it right now in our context where those words have different meanings than they did at the time. I'm not saying that Kevin is comfortable with that. I mean, when he made the film, right, it meant a thing, and that's presumably what he wanted to say. But I think if we talk to him now, he would say, yes, that lands different now than it did back then, and that changes how that plays out.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, he was in his 20s. I think that is what was going on there. And then about 30 minutes in, if you do not enjoy sexually explicit conversations, then just go ahead and fast forward. There is a rather long conversation about cunnilingus. And I was reading the trivia, and he said that he felt like that's what people would have, that's what, I mean, I guess not men, because there were two women involved in that conversation too. But so that's what young people would have been talking about, all these different stories. Oh yeah, well, that happened to you? Listen to what happened to me, And I was like, okay, I do kind of get that. I don't know if I'm just getting old. It went on a little bit too long. That's not, I guess, my favorite. I'm more the Jersey Girl catch and release level of Kevin Smith films, I guess.
Well,
I felt this film made me feel very old.
It didn't bother me necessarily. I just don't think I've ever had that kind of conversation with any human being. Right?
You've never compared cunnilingus stories.
No, and maybe I'm living a shallow life that's missing out on some really exciting conversations. But, it didn't bother me necessarily, but I also didn't feel like, oh, yeah, that's totally true. That's what we always do at the diner, right?
No, I don't know. It was just like, all right, moving on. Like, I was just over it. Like, it didn't bother me that I was like, oh, my God, I can't. I wasn't clutching pearls, but I was just like, ugh, all right. Like, moving on. I
felt like the character of Holden had that response in the scene, though. That's kind of what I responded to. Was he was just sitting there like, oh my gosh, like Banky shut up.
Yeah.
And I think even at one point he did yell at him to shut up.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That's a good observation. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. I wrote down so many monologues.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
to your point earlier.
Yeah.
And then I did write that he's writing Holden as a simple-minded idiot, which I think the reason I wrote that note was at the end when he comes up with the great idea of how since Banky, and that was a painful scene. Because was it you? Or
Yeah.
Oh, no. And they were saying, like, don't say it. Don't say it. Don't say it.
Yeah, that was Alyssa. She's like, don't say it, dummy.
But I want to say Banky said it too.
Quite possibly.
But I thought, actually, as I was watching this, the first time I saw it, I thought, ugh, what a, self-absorbed. But I thought, no, he loves Banky in a very platonic bro way. He loves Alyssa. Alyssa and Banky don't like each other. So he thinks the perfect antidote for this problem is that all three of them should just have sex together.
And if you're 19, that's
a
probably
great
does
idea.
make sense, right?
Right. And everybody else is just cringing like, dude, shut up.
Dummy.
Right.
Right. So that I have to say, as cringeworthy as that was, I could see one of my dumb buddies in college coming up with a similar idea. Right. Yeah. The one thing that was a little bit weird is I think at that time and place, I think suggesting that your bro have sex with you and the girl would have been maybe a little cringeworthy.
Yeah.
But if he meant it in a way where the two gents did have a lot of interaction, I could see maybe that a bit more.
Right.
Right. And maybe today's day and age, the young gentlemen are a little bit more fluid. But back then, I think there would have been a strong, no touching kind of thing between the two guys.
Right. Right. And I think, yeah, because when he's on the swing, he almost gets that, oh, eureka! Like he has just solved all of the world's problems.
And I think what was implied there was he was thinking of the finger cuffs incident.
Right.
When he was proposing that.
Right. Exactly. All right. Watch the film if you want to know what that's about. I ain't talking about it. So for sets, the Comic-Con, which we know Kevin is extremely familiar with, although I could tell that this was the early 90s Comic-Con, like the first one we went to. It's not the massive, overly marketed and saturated of Comic-Cons today. So that was, in a way, kind of nostalgic and cool to see, just big tables, set with the curtaining, how they drape the curtains behind them.
Those were the good old days.
Yep. Over commercialized. That's what I wanted. And then the quick stop. We see the quick stop again, which is started in Clerks, and we see it in almost every Kevin Smith film from here on out. So that's definitely a character in any Kevin Smith film. Do we have any head trauma?
I do not have any listed head trauma, other than maybe the trauma to your ears of some of the language.
Yeah, this one is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of blue commentary in this one. How about a smoochie?
Smoochy, smoochy, smoochy. My smoochy count is 56:45 when Alyssa ambushes Holden in the rain with a smoochie.
That's a very romantic scene, right? Is it he kind of even yelling at her and she just comes running back and just...
Right. She kind of yells at him a little bit about him springing this on her. And I did make a note that in that, I think in the lead up to the kiss, in his long block of dialogue, he had a great line. I can't stand next to you without wanting to hold you.
Oh,
which I thought was a very romantic line. Again, Kevin Smith is a secret romantic.
He's a big old softy, huge romantic. So that's the lines I like.
Mm-hmm.
How about a driving review?
So I did previously mention the Ford Explorer. Also, we didn't get to see what particular Banky's car was, but there was some hood trauma, because a couple is getting busy on top of his car, and later on Holden tells Banky that the hood has been dented by their activities.
That's right.
But while Holden is driving Alyssa and fighting with her, he does a decent job, I think, of driving safely. But again, folks, probably save the arguments when you're not operating the motor vehicle.
Pull over to the side, right?
Yeah, even in the rain, it turns out it can be a very romantic argument if you're yelling at each other in the rain.
All right, so should we go to the numbers?
Sure.
This movie had a budget of $250,000, so I think after they gave him so much for Mallrats, they were like, all right, pal, we're not going to give you as much this time. And he made good on it. The opening weekend, it got 52,000 and made 12 million overall domestically. So a win in the column for profitability for this film.
Yeah, back on the back in the black.
Mm-hmm. And the IMDb score was just a little bit less than Mallrats, 7.2. It runs an hour and 53 minutes, and it's rated R. And like I said, it's a comedy romance drama.
I have to say, one thing that really struck me so much so that I did some Googling is Ben Affleck's teeth in this film did not look like his contemporary
His current teeth.
grill. And so I did have to look it up, and I think he got some help in the dental department between this film and 2021. But
well, I will say, and I meant to look up when Good Will Hunting was, but I was watching... There's a documentary on Prime about the making of the film that we will talk about at the end of the month, Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. And Ben has great affection for Kevin. He said that Kevin gave him his big break in that he approached him in, I think it was this film, Chasing Amy. He was in Mallrats, but he basically came to Ben and said, I want you to be Holden. And that was the first time that Ben didn't have to audition for a part. And so putting him in a leading role as Holden in this film, I think gave him enough juice that then they could get, and then Kevin and Kevin's producer, Scott Mosier, were executive producers on Good Will Hunting. So I think with a little bit of juice, a little bit of help probably from Miramax at the time, that's how Ben has an Oscar right now.
right, well, maybe some of that 12 million was sent Ben's way, and he was able to
fix his teeth.
take serious. Yeah. Not that they were horrible, but it's just he's got a great smile. So I noticed the difference in this film. Like, oh wow. So good on him for that dedication and that work.
Yep. All right, so that does it for this week's episode of Chasing Amy. Like I said, you have been forewarned. It is rated R. Make your choices. We're all adults. Come back next week when we will be talking about Jersey Girl. Don't forget.
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.